Part of the Spring Wardrobe Capsule Wardrobe, a sew along and a pattern review. So yes, you know, like this top, it was a piece of work for sure, but we will definitely talk about it. All right. So if that's some content you would like to see, keep on watching. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video, I'm going to do a quick pattern review and then off to the sew along for this tunic top that I made as part of my 10-piece spring capsule wardrobe. So yes, I'm still doing it. I know a lot of you guys DM me and asked me if it was still coming along. Yes, it's just this is the busiest part of work, okay? So it's taking me longer than what I expected, but it should be, you know, pieces is coming these upcoming weeks, all right? Now, if you are new to the channel, welcome. Hello, ciao, guten tag, aloha, hola, konnichiwa, sambunani, solom, bonjour. If you are returning, you know what to do. Go get your quick snack. Come on back so we could go ahead and talk about it, okay? So without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and get into this quick pattern review and then off to the sew along. So let's first start with the pattern description, all right? So for this top, it is a V-neck top that has a knot at the top of the neckline, a back keyhole with loops, and button, and then you have sleeve variations. Now view A has a tie belt for sure, but I did not use that tie belt sash for mine. I just wanted kind of like a little boxiness or whatever. But then you also can put, I did view C, by the way, and there is an elastic sleeve for that as well. So you have a sleeveless version, a sleeve version, and then you have an elastic sleeve version. So there's 3 versions for this top, all right? So let's go ahead and move over into the skill level. So I did not check the Something Delightful website. If you did not know, Something Delightful and Simplicity will be joining forces. So I'm going to say Something Delightful until they join forces on the new site. All right. So on the Something Delightful website, I think this is rated as easy, but it could be average. I don't know because I did not check, all right? But do I feel that this pattern is an easy to sew pattern? No. I feel like it's more for my intermediate beginners, and you're gonna need to know some techniques. And we'll get to what we're gonna be doing differently in the sew along as well as here shortly, all right? Let's talk about the notions used. So for the notions used, you will need a button. I think my button is 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I mean 3/8 of an inch button, but I will put it up on the screen and you will hear it again in the sew along, all right? So I'm not gonna get into that simply because I did do the sew along over 2 weeks ago, okay? And I just have not posted the sew along because I needed to take photos in the top, and it's just I've been super busy with work and children, almost end of the school year. I can't wait for the summer. I'm not gonna lie to you there, all right? Let's talk about fabric use. So I did say this when I talked about my tops for the 10-piece spring capsule wardrobe, but this is from Joann's. It's in a solid. I'm gonna put it up on the screen. The name of this fabric, if you are interested in this fabric, all right? So this fabric is, I believe it's called clay. If I remember correctly, it's something clay. And this fabric is more like a orangey tan color. And the pictures does not do it justice. However, I will say it is a really nice color on the skin. So I thought about doing pants for it, but I feel like it looks better as a top, in my opinion. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about pattern sizing. All right. For this pattern, it comes in 2 envelopes, 8 to 16 on the first envelope and 18 to 26 on that second envelope. So the size that I cut was a size 16 for this pattern, and I did not, so let's talk about modifications while we're here. I did do a modification. I did the modification at the hips, and you will see that here in the sew along as well. I'll tell you about what I did for the modification as well. Now, I will talk about modifications. That's the only modifications. Did it look like the photos or the drawing on the pattern envelope? Yes, it does. But there are some reasoning behind that. I said it in a previous video, but I'm going to say it in this video here shortly. All right. Speaking of those issues, it's not necessarily issues. It's just the pattern did not say that. Are the instructions easy to follow? So let's get right on into, are the instructions easy to follow? They are for the most part. Okay. But I'm going to open it out and tell you where it becomes one of those where it's like, what am I supposed to do? All right. So when you get to the neck facing, so step number 10 through 15, if you are doing view C like I did, all right, and this sew along is view C, it never tells you where you will cut this V. So if you can see it right here, you will not see any of this, and I had to take it down and correct it because as I'm following along with the instructions, I try to do it with the instructions, and if it doesn't look right, I do my own thing, all right? So because I want to get you guys into sewing with the instructions, I try not to go out of order unless it's too much with going back and forth to the sewing machine, okay? So in the sew along, you will hear me tell you to take it apart and cut the V. Now, I'm going to say this before you get over to the sew along. Cut the V first before you attach that neck facing. Reason being is because if you attach the neck facing without cutting that V, you will have to do what I did and pull it apart. Now, the top part right here, which is the tab at the very top, it needs to be sandwiched between the main fabric and the facing. So if it's not sandwiched, it will not look right. All right. So I want to make that very clear that the instructions are easy to follow. It's right, but it does not tell you where you need to cut for that V. All right. So be mindful of that. And I'm going to tell you, make sure you cut that V portion first before you sew it on. If you do not, you will be unpicking in the sew along. All right. I just want to make sure you are aware of that because there's a V right here underneath that tab. All right. So from that tab down, there's a V. All right. So that's enough about that. All right. Let's talk about likes and dislikes. So I like the pattern. I feel like it's very, I wouldn't say it's a quick, easy pattern to sew. It's not a lot of pattern pieces, and I did not talk about pattern pieces because you will see that in the sew along. But it's not a lot of pattern pieces. It's easy to sew up quickly, but with the tab and the V and all that stuff, it became a like, but a dislike. So the portions that I dislike, now that I talked about likes, let's go ahead and talk about the dislike. The portions that I dislike is this tab should have came down. Yes, I'm not a fan of a lot of cleavage showing or anything. And I like the V, but I feel like this tab up here is like way too high. I feel like I'm choking a little bit, you know, but on the pattern envelope, I'm going to show the pattern envelope right here. It shows that hers is up a little high as well. I didn't realize that from the pattern, so it's a dislike there. But if I do this pattern again, I would not put the tab on. I'm just going to cut into that V and make it do what it do without that tab. I think it would look cute as a V-neck tunic as well. But yeah, that's the only dislike that I have for this pattern. Let's talk about first time experiences. I wouldn't say I have a first time experience other than putting this tab on. I have done tabs and stuff, but not of this, you know, this style of tab. Okay. So that was the first time experience. Yeah, that's it for the first time experience. Would I sew this pattern again? Maybe. I'm not going to say I wouldn't because I feel like this could be an easy wardrobe builder if you are doing like a business wardrobe series and you need a quick top and you don't want a button down shirt. This could be that top for you. So Possibly, I'm gonna say I could possibly see myself sewing this again, but not anytime soon. All right. Would I recommend this pattern to others? Definitely. That's why I did a sew along for this, because for my older, younger, and in between age range, I think everyone could benefit from this pattern. So I decided, you guys asked me, can I give you guys more sew alongs? So I am trying to give you guys more sew alongs for these patterns that you guys want to see sew alongs for. So I would say, yes, I would recommend this pattern to others. But let's talk about my pattern rating before we get over to the sew along. All right. So for this pattern, I'm going to rate this pattern as a 3.5 out of 5. I know you're like, well, I thought you said that it was you. I like it, but I would do some things differently for this pattern, like not putting on this tab whatsoever. Another thing that I would say is for the arm, the sleeves, I would definitely drop that armhole at least 1 inch. One thing that I realized is it's not tight in the bust, but it is tight in the arms a little bit. So 2 things that you can do. You can either drop the armhole on the side by 1 inch before you do your sleeve. So when it comes up, it's sitting really nice. Or you could cut a bigger sleeve there. But I think for me, it would be best to, you know, drop the armhole about 1 inch and it'll fit not too tight. I mean, like, it's not super duper tight, but I would like a little bit more room in the underarm area. All right. Well, that's it for this pattern review. I hope you enjoyed. And since you made it this far, let's go ahead and get right on over to the sew along. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the next sew along. So this is part of my spring 10-piece capsule wardrobe that I've been sharing with you guys over the last couple of weeks, okay? So I decided that I was going to be doing a sew along for this top right here, which is Butterick 6876, which is a tunic. I have done a complete pattern review for that. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and rewind it back so you can see that pattern review. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this pattern. Now, this pattern is I would love to say that it's super easy to sew, but when you get to pleats, it's kind of hard to say that it's an easy to sew pattern. It's more of like a advanced pattern. But if you follow along, then you'll know that it's a pretty easy pattern to sew. All right. So let's go ahead and get into the tools and supplies you will need in order to construct this tunic. So the tools and supplies that you will need is, of course, your pins. You will need scissors, 1 for paper, 1 for fabric. Never mix the 2 there. You will also need rotary cutters, 1 for paper, 1 for fabric. You should never mix the 2 there. You will need like a pencil or a pen. That's if you're making adjustments like I have done on my pattern. Of course, you will need rulers if you are sizing up your pattern. You will need your pattern, of course. You need the pattern instructions. Then you need your marking tools, some disappearing ink markers or some chalk or something. Then you need your calculator. So your calculator is for you to size up your pattern if you need to size up your pattern. It's easy to put it on a calculator instead of trying to do it in your head. So you will need a calculator. And then when it comes to notions, the only notion that you will need is, of course, 1 3/8 inch button. And then you will also need 7/8 yards, or I'm just going to say 1 yard of 3/8 inch wide elastic. Okay. So those are all the tools and supplies that you will need in order to construct this tunic. So let's go ahead and get into the instructions. All right, so let's go ahead and get into these instructions for this pattern, Butterick 6876. This is a pattern that came out last spring 2022. So I decided to go ahead and pull it out and do this as a simple tunic to sew up real quick for this spring capsule wardrobe. So first of all, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the pattern piece, which I will show you here shortly. You will need, I am doing view C, by the way. So you will need pattern piece 1 through 6, number 10, your sleeves, and number 12, your guide for your elastic or elastic guide. Okay. Make sure you make note of all of the terms, your cutting layout, what side is the right side of the pattern, wrong side of pattern, right side of fabric, wrong side of fabric, the terms, grain lines, single thickness, double thickness, the fold. You should know that by now. But if you are new to sewing, this is not a complete like beginner sewing course, but I'm going to walk you through it as if it's a learn to sew beginner course, because my instructions for sewing patterns, I like to be detailed, but I like for you guys to go back to other videos. When I say go back to this video to see how I did that. So some of the terminologies I will not do in the video if we have done so already several times. All right. So also I'm doing top C. So make sure you cut out the pattern pieces that I stated thus far. Also, I am using 45-inch fabric, a solid color, which I will put that link to the fabric I am using in the description box below, as well as on the screen. It is from Joann, so I'll go ahead and put that up on the screen as well. So just make sure, for me, for any sides that you are cutting, you need to make sure that pattern piece number 1 and 2, the pattern piece needs to be facing, the wrong side of the pattern piece needs to be facing up, like you see right here. When you have to fold them right sides together, and then cut that out as you see right here. Now, pattern piece number 10, 3 and 4. 3 and 4 needs to be cut once, and then pattern piece number 10, if you cannot fit it on your fabric, you need to cut it on single layer. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the glossary. So the glossary is right here. You need to know what finishing. My finishing will be with my serger. So when I say finish off your seams, that's what I'm talking about. However you decide to finish off your seam, gathering and understitching, make sure you know what those are. The seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, like it shows you here on the pattern as well. Now, just to kind of walk you through the steps, which we will be doing this, as you guys know, I try to stay in order with the pattern. However, I have so many different techniques that I like to use to keep me from running back and forth to the sewing machine. So I will be showing you guys that as well. You may be pinning quite a bit of things together and out of order. So just make note of that as well. So in step number 1, we're going to go ahead and do our pleats in the front of your top. Pattern step number 2, we will go ahead and gather both the front where the pleats are, and then again on the tabs. Step number 4, we will go ahead and attach the tab facing to the tab and then understitch in number 5. Once we do that, we're going to go ahead and baste the raw edges and turn it to the right side. On step number 7, we're going to go ahead and place our tab on our front pattern piece. And step number 8, we're going to go ahead and stitch the back sections together, which is pattern piece number 2. Step number 9, we're going to go ahead and attach the front to the back at the shoulders. And then we're going to go ahead and start constructing our neck facing in step number 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, and end with 15 with understitching it to make sure that it stays to the inside. All right. Once we do that, we're going to jump all the way over to step number 31. Now, I did highlight 31, 32, I'm sorry, 21, 22, and 23, but I am not doing view B. All right. So number 21, you will gather the sleeve, and number 22, you will go ahead and stitch the sleeve seams. Now, before I do that with step number 22, stitching the sleeve seams, I will go ahead and do my elastic casing at the bottom first before I do step number 22. So I will be doing 21, and then I will skip all the way over to 32, 30, 33, 34, and 35, and then come back to 22 and sew my sleeve seam. The reason why I do that is because it's easier for me to sift the elastic through, tack it down at the ends, and then sew them together. It's just easier for me to do it that way. Once you do your sleeves, we're going to go ahead and do our hem, add our buttons, and you are all done. All right. So that is just the instruction. So now that I talked about the instruction, let me go ahead and move my instructions out of the way, and we could go ahead and start talking about our pattern pieces. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the pattern pieces for Butterick 6876. So the first pattern that, of course, you will definitely need is pattern piece number 1, which is the front. You need to cut 1 unfold of the fabric. The pattern piece, the wrong side of the pattern piece should be facing up, facing you, like you see here. And then the right side of the pattern, this portion needs to be facing on your fabric. Make sure you transfer all your dots and your notches as well. It makes a huge difference when we're constructing, okay? Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 2, which is your back for your top. And you need to cut 2, not on the fold of the fabric, all right? Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 3, which is your tab. You need to cut 1. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 4, your tab facing. You need to cut 1. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 5, which is your front facing. You need to cut 1 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of interfacing. When it's 1 on fabric, you need to cut this fold right here and then it comes up. All right, so make sure you are following that curve up, okay? So I'm gonna open it out to show you what it will look like, but this is what it should look like once you cut it, okay? So you have this portion right here is actually on the fold. The other part is not on the fold. So make sure when you are cutting on the fold, you cut that piece on this portion on the fold and then it'll curve out, okay? So that's pattern piece number 5. Pattern piece number 6, you need to cut 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. And then the last pattern piece that you will be cutting out of fabric is pattern piece number 10, which are your sleeves. And you need to cut 2 of fabric. So this is pattern piece number 10. You need to cut 2 of fabric. And then the only thing that you will need is some elastic. This is pattern piece number 12. This is your elastic guide. You will not cut it out of fabric. You'll just cut 2 pieces of elastic for both sleeves. All right. So that's all the pattern pieces that you will need. Let's go ahead and get sewing. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this tutorial. So go ahead and grab pattern piece number 1, which is your front, which should have been cut on the fold. And the first thing we're going to do is make our pleats, okay? So first thing I want to do is grab your pattern piece, right? And you see how it shows you that this pleat is going to be coming down, all right? So what I'm gonna do is mark this to show that it's supposed to be going down. So this pleat right here, I make a little snip at the top of my pleat and I'm gonna fold it over just like that. And I'm going to pin. So I'm gonna take my pen and place it right here, okay? All right, now when you look at the top one, right, it tells you that this pleat is supposed to go this way, going upward. So I'm just gonna make a upward sign right here to let me know that that pleat goes that direction. All right, so what I'm gonna do is take this one at the bottom and make sure that the dots match just like that and pin. All right, so I'm gonna do the other side just to show you that, right? So I'm gonna do the other side, but then you're gonna go to the sewing machine and baste across both, okay? So first, let me go ahead and do my other side. Now I'm just gonna put a pin right here to keep my pleat together, okay? Now I'm gonna bring the instructions because the one at the top just looked a little weird to me. So let me bring the instructions back. So I am looking at the instructions and what it looks like is the bottom one is supposed to be down and the top one is supposed to be going up. So, I mean, it looks a little weird to me to have this pleat going up instead of down, but that's the direction that it's in. So I'm just following the directions. All right. So now when I look this direction, right, it shows that this pleat right here is supposed to be going up and this one is supposed to be going down. So we will do the exact same thing. I'm just going to make a marking right here. So this one goes up and this one comes down. All right. So I'm going to make my pleat just like I did for the other side. So go ahead and make your pleat now. All right, so now that I have my pleats done, what I'm gonna do is go to the sewing machine and I'm going to baste like at 3/8 of an inch just to keep both of those pleats in place and then press my pleats flat. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that we went ahead and did our pleats on the front at the top, and this one right here, I also went ahead and gathered between the pleats. So you should have created gathers between your pleats. Now, what I'm gonna do is go ahead and gather right here by, just pull a little bit of gather. Now I'm gonna do mine as I am going ahead to attach the tab. So I'm just gonna gather a little bit. You don't want to gather it too much because you want to make sure that it's fitting on there. So I'm just going to gather just a little bit right there, not too much. I don't want to pull too much. All right, create a little bit of gathers and make sure that your gathers are even, okay? So I think that's about enough. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and move my top over to the side and grab my tab, which is pattern piece number 3. Now what I did for pattern piece number 3 is I went ahead and gathered at the top where you have that notch between the 2 dots, and then I gathered at the bottom where you have the 2 dots. So all I'm gonna do is go ahead, I created 2 rows of gathers, and I'm just gonna gather this because our tab facing is gonna be right on top. So I'm just gonna go ahead and gather this like you see me doing here. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it around and gather the bottom. So now that the tab is gathered at the top and the bottom, make sure you know where your notch is at the top. Grab pattern piece number 4, your tab facing, and make sure with right sides together. Now I did mark a number 4 on the back of mine, so I know which one it is. What I'm going to do is go ahead and pin at that notch, right? And then I'm going to make sure that I have it gathered enough to where the dots meet on both sides, and I'm going to pin. And then I'm going to gather just a tad bit more so my dots meet at the top. So make sure that it's gathered really good for both the top and the bottom, and that it fits with no issues whatsoever. All right, and you could definitely adjust your gathers as you see fit. You're going to do the same thing for the bottom. Make sure that your dots are matching at the bottom and pin. So I'm going to start on this side and I'm going to pin there. And then I'm going to make sure to gather to where the other dot fits with no issues. Right? And I'm going to pin there. Then I'm going to adjust my gathers. And once I adjust my gathers, what I'm going to do is using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, I'm going to back stitch at the beginning, sew across the top, and back stitch at the end, and then sew across the bottom. Back stitching at the beginning and at the end. Go ahead and do that now. So now that I have the tab onto the tab facing, or the tab facing onto the tab, whichever way you want to say it, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and trim down the seam allowance at the top and at the bottom. So I'm going to trim. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to understitch, okay? So understitch is done at about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So what I'm going to be doing is understitch on the tab. So basically what that looks like is this is the tab over here. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I am understitching, press it, and then I'm going to understitch right here. So go ahead and do that now, and then turn it right side out. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and stitched the tabs together, I understitched, I pressed it down. The next step I'm gonna do is go ahead and match up the dots at the top and at the bottom to these dots that you have. Now, you should have marked all of your dots, transferred them. So these are the 2 dots I'm talking about. And then if you look up the pleat here, there's 2 dots right here. So you will gather to make sure that both of them fit. So I'm going to match up so basically this is number 3. You make sure that your tab is up instead of your facing. And then I'm just going to match the dot to this dot right here, and I'm going to pin there. Then I'm going to go ahead and go to the other dot over here and match it up like so. and I'm going to pin there. Then I'm going to look at the bottom and I'm going to make sure that it match up, and I'm going to pin on both sides. All right. So now what you're going to do is go to the sewing machine and just baste these down right here at the dot. So go ahead and baste the tab down to your front now. All right, so now that I went ahead and add the tab onto the front, I went ahead and basted it down. So now what I'm gonna do is go ahead and move my front out of the way, grab my back pattern piece number 2. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna go ahead and serge my center back seam from the top all the way down. Why? Because I'm going to serge them separately instead of together. And the reason why is because there will be an opening from this dot all the way up, and it's because there will be a button in the back. Now, if you want to do what I may decide to do and not do a button and do like a loop button instead of a thread button, or you can make some ties in the back. I have a video where I make ties all the time for the back of mine. I might decide to do that as well. Have not decided on which one I'm going to do just yet. But first, serge your center back seam. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pin our center back seam. I'm going to pin at the notch, pin at this dot right here. And then I'm going to pin the length of my back. So let me go ahead and take this back pattern piece off. And then I'm just going to pin up the back. So go ahead and pin from the end, the bottom, all the way up to that dot now. Now I'm going to turn mine over so you can see this, but I'm going to pin all the way up to that dot now. Now that I have my back pin using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, and then back stitch at this dot. Once you do that, go ahead and press your seams open. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the back sewn together, I went ahead and pressed my seams open. I finished them off, and this is what the back is looking like. Go ahead and grab your front pattern piece, and what we're going to do is with right sides together, we're going to go ahead and sew our shoulder seams up, okay? So with right sides together, go ahead and match the notches and then pin all the way across your shoulders. So go ahead and pin across both shoulders now. All right, so now that I have my shoulders pinned using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end and sew across both shoulder seams, then finish them off and press your seam allowance towards the back. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and finished sewing my shoulders, and then I went ahead and pressed my seam allowance towards the back, I'm gonna go ahead and move my top out of the way and grab my facing. So pattern piece number 5 is your front facing. And then pattern piece number 6 is your back facing. So this is pattern piece number 5, and this is pattern piece number 6. Now, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little note for myself that says 5 front, and then I don't have to write on pattern piece number 6, okay? And the reason why is because once you attach them together, you want to make sure you know which one is the back and which side is the front, all right? So the next thing you're going to do is take pattern piece number 6. This is your back pattern piece. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pin at that notch that you have right here. Pin at that dot. So there's a dot. I'm going to bring it closer so you can see that. There's a dot right here. You're going to pin there and then pin at the bottom. And what you're going to do is starting at the bottom using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the bottom and sew all the way to that dot and then back stitch at that dot. Go ahead and do that now and then press the seams open. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and attached the back facing from the dot all the way down to the bottom, the next thing we're gonna do is with right sides together, we're going to attach the facing at the shoulder. So you have a notch right there, so pin at the notch and then pin all the way across. So go ahead and pin your shoulder seams of your facing together now. right, so now that I have the shoulder seams pinned, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then you want to sew across both shoulder seams. Once you do that, go ahead and press your seam allowance open, and then you're going to finish off the bottom edge all the way around. So you're going to finish off the bottom edge of the front and the bottom edge of the back, okay, using your serger or however else you have been finishing off your seam allowance. All right, so go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and attached my front to back facing at the shoulders, I went ahead and finished it off. Now grab your top, and what you're going to do, make sure you have your top turned right side out. What you're going to do is, with right sides together, make sure you have your front, okay, to your front and your back facing to your back, all right? So what you're going to do is you're going to match up your notches in the front and pin. Make sure you are matching up the dots that you have in the front. All right, so you should have transferred all your dots as well, okay? Make sure that you have that. So I'm going to pin at the dots at the bottom right here. I'm going to make sure I'm pinning there on both sides. Now, you also, on your pattern piece, you should have 2 dots right here and then a dot there, okay? These 2 dots meet up to the bottom dots right there, so just make sure you are pinning all the way down, all right? So you have a dot right there. So I'm going to pin this there. You'll see what happens here shortly. And I'm going to pin there. And then I'm going to pin right here where that last one, because it creates a V. So what I'm going to do is grab my marking tool, and I'm going to make that V that I already had drawn on the front, all right? Now make sure that your V is pretty darn straight. All right, I'm going to go back in with my ruler and do that as well. And then I'm going to pin my dot there and then pin all the way around, making sure that I match up my notches, my shoulders, and all dots. So go ahead and finish pinning the back of your facing to the back of your top now. Making sure you unpress, will pull out the back seam allowance that you originally pressed in. Make sure you have it pulled out. You do not have it pressed in, all right? So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have it pinned all the way around, so what we're going to do is, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to start in the back at this dot. I'm going to sew from this dot to the corner. Well, I'm going to back stitch at the dot first at the beginning. When I get to each corner, I'm going to pivot and go around the front, get to the corner, pivot, go all the way around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. When I get back to the back, I'm going to back stitch there as well. I'm going to trim it down, understitch, and then press my seam allowance towards the facing, okay? And then press my facing to the inside. Now, if you have never done a facing like this, it's like putting on any type of facing. You're just gonna stitch all the way around, making sure when you get to these dots down here, you pivot down here, pivot. So you're gonna sew, get to that dot, pivot, then come all the way back up the same directions, okay? If you are unfamiliar what to do, look at your instructions. I'm going to bring the instructions back. Like you see on step number 13, with right sides together, pin facing to garment, matching centers, dots and seam, stitch neck and back opening, edges between large dot on back, continuing along the stitching lines, leaving the left front open between the dots for the tab, right? And then you're going to clip to center back, trim seams, and then clip your curves. So that's what you're going to do. And then on number 14, it tells you to turn your facing to the inside. You're going to give a press, open out the front facing, slip free end of tap through the facing, and then open out the left front. So that's what you're going to do there. So if you do step 13 and 14, and then you're going to understitch. When we come back, we will be putting on the sleeves. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so I went ahead and did the facing and all that good stuff. So I noticed some problems with the instructions. So the first thing I'm gonna do is, let's go ahead and talk about that first. And then we'll go ahead and talk about how I already have one sleeve put into my top or tunic, whichever one you wanna call. So I'm gonna grab the pattern instructions. And it is at the beginning, the very beginning, okay? So right here on step number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, it never says anything about cutting into your facing and your top in order to make this V at the bottom, okay? Now, I'm gonna tell you, it never says it, okay? So at the very beginning of 1 and 2, you were supposed to cut your V. So I went back and did mine, because if you look at step 7, it never says anything about the V there. It never says anything about the V in 10, 11, 12, or 13 whatsoever. 14 doesn't say anything about cutting into that V. So it doesn't say anything, but I want to tell you what I did so you could get a better idea of how to fix this portion right here where your tab is, right underneath that portion. What you need to do is you will have your facing on there, right? You will cut, do not cut through the dot. You will cut to that dot without cutting through the dot. And then you should have your tab sandwiched in between the main fabric, which is this portion right here, and your facing. If you do not have it like that, then you have it sewn on incorrectly. So you will need to unpick, make sure you sandwich. What sandwich means is make sure that your tab is in between your, like this. I'm going to try to show you. That means that you have your main fabric, then your tab, then your facing. That's what you should have for your tab on both sides. Right here at this V, you need to have with right sides together when you sew it. You should have everything pinned all the way around to where when you understitch all the way around, it should look like this with no issues, okay? To where when you push the facing in, it's sitting on your body. I know you can't see me, I'm sorry. It's sitting on your body, right? Instead of away from your body, okay? So that's what you should have, all right? So there's a couple of things that you're going to need to do, and the next couple of steps you should already know how to do at this point, because if you haven't, I have showed this in many of my tutorials, so you could go back and watch one of those. But the next step is to go ahead and sew on your sleeve. Now, I did one just to kind of show you that you will have elastic at the bottom. So I'm going to give you an example. I made sure not to sew on the other one to show you this, but what I did was I made sure to mark the wrong side of my sleeve, okay? So there's a 10 right here. You probably can't see it because I did it with a white pencil, but it's right there. And what I did was I created 2 rows of gathering stitches along the sleeve cap. After I did that, I created a stitching line 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, because I'm using 3/8 of an inch, add 2/8 or 1/4 to that number. That's why I created a seam allowance at the bottom of 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So it's big enough to sift my 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way through. Now, I want to say, you do not have to use 3/8 of an inch elastic. If you have a 1/2 of an inch, make sure that when you create your basting stitch at the bottom, use 3/4 of an inch, okay? So if you think about it, a 1/2 inch plus a 1/4 of an inch is 3/4 inch. Say for instance, you don't want to go and buy you don't want to go and buy elastic. So you have 3/4 of an inch elastic, right? Add a 1/4 of an inch to that and make a casing of 1 inch. Just add a 1/4 of an inch to whatever size elastic that you have in order for that elastic to sift all the way across with no issues. Now, if you notice, this sleeve is not sewn together. What I did was after I created that, I sewn on the top to encase that 1/4 of an inch underneath and have a nice roll of elastic like this, okay? I also tacked it down on both ends to where my elastic is not going anywhere. I'm gonna clip off the elastics at the end here shortly. And then all you need to do is sew on your sleeves using the flat method. So what you're gonna do is lay out your sleeve to where it's looking like a U, okay? And then you're gonna take your sleeve, right sides together, you're going to pin. Make sure you gather to where it'll fit into your armscye. This is called the armscye of your sleeve, right? So you're gonna pin at the single notch. I'm not gonna pin it, but I'm just gonna kind of tell you, you're gonna pin at the single knot, pin at the end, pin all the way across to the other end, making sure you pin at this notch. Now, there should have been a dot. That dot goes to the center of your sleeve as well. So pin all the way, making sure you adjust the sleeve and everything. Once you do that, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're gonna back stitch at the beginning and at the end of your sleeve after you get it pinned, okay? Finish off your seam allowance of your sleeve. After you finish your seam allowance of the sleeve, I'm gonna show you on the one that I already completed. You're gonna turn your top right sides facing. It's gonna look like this, and you're gonna pin from your hem all the way to the sleeve, making sure you pin at the notch right here and pin at this notch right here, and making sure that your seam allowance for your sleeve is pressed towards the sleeve, okay? So you're gonna pin from the hem all the way up to the sleeve hem, okay? And then you're gonna sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Once you sew that together, you're gonna finish off your seam allowance, okay? So that's what you do for your sleeve. After you do that, the only thing left for you to do is your hem. Now I'm gonna turn mine back right sides out, but what you wanna do is create a hemline. Now I do not remember from the pattern what the hem allowance is. The hem allowance is 1 1/4, okay? So just make sure you press up 1 1/4. Now what I'm gonna do for mine is I'm gonna create a basting stitch at 1 1/4, press in a 1/4 of an inch, and then press up to another inch, okay? And then on the right side, I'm gonna sew all the way around, encasing that 1/4 of an inch. Once you do that, you are all done with your top. This is one of the spring tops for 2023 for that spring capsule wardrobe. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you make this top, Butterick 6876, do not forget to tag me on Instagram at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Until the next tutorial. All right, so there you have it. That's the entire pattern review and the sew along. I hope you enjoyed. If you make this top, do not forget to tag me on Instagram at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. And since you made it this far, do not forget to hit that like button, subscribe button, and also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. And one last thing before I close out this video. If you have not done so already, I have put 2 links in the description box below. They are to Google Forms. The first Google form is for a Vogue sew along for the new spring pattern. So if you want me to do a Vogue sew along, go to the Google form and vote. The other one is for the Simplicity Spring 2023 pattern that you think I should do a sew along for. All right, so it's in the description box below. Do not forget to check those out. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. this video. Until next time, keep sewing.
Too many, I'm going. Too crazy, and I got bad ones and they ready. A good time, so now it's into it. We left that. Can't remember anything, but I know we got lit. Good times. Live in the moment, feel like summertime. Obsessed with nature, not a world mine. The room is spinning, but I feel fine. Oh my, chandelier limousines. Really think I'm seeing things.